Today my guest is ToddAnglin. Todd, how are you, sir?
Very good, thank you.
What do you do, Todd?
I work for Telerik. I'm chief evangelist for Telerik, which means I get to tell lots of people about some pretty incredible tools that save them time.
I've seen you speak at conferences before, and one thing I've noticed is that you're all over the place in terms of technology.
Telerik recognizes that the development space is pretty broad, and so as an evangelist and things I talk about as well, I get to cover a lot of those different technologies from HTML5 to XAML to even data access. So we recognize the need to serve developers at all aspects of software development with high-quality solutions, and as a result, I get to be in a lot of different spots.
That sounds like a fun job.
It's fun. It's a lot of always something new, right?
All right. But we don't have a ton of time here. Let's narrow the focus down. Let's talk about HTML5.
We can't talk about everything right now?
Not this time.
Right,
we'll have a part 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so on.
Make a Lord of the Rings out of this.
I'm really excited about 2022.
Yeah.
Because I'm excited about HTML5.
Yeah.
First of all, what's the significance of that date, 2022?
Yeah, the 2020 date.
2020, excuse me, sorry.
Really 2022, if we're being specific on the date that's floated out there for when HTML5 will be ready, be official, so to speak. The date really isn't that significant when it gets right down to it. The date was put out there as the date that we'd likely be at when the entire standards process would be complete for HTML5. And what that essentially represents is the point at which we have at least 2 full implementations of HTML5 that are tested to be fully interoperable. So it's a bit of a chicken and the egg thing. HTML5 is not done until the browsers implementing HTML5 are done, and you really can't have finished HTML5 browsers until the spec is done. So this is just all standards body stuff, all about just when will it be official on paper. The thing that developers need to be concerned with is where are we at in terms of consistency across the deployed browsers. Because at the end of the day, the browsers are the victors. The browsers are the definers of what you can use for HTML5. And if we think about something like Ajax or any of these technologies we've been using, many of them we use today are not finished standards, but we still use them successfully in websites.
All right, so this isn't a case of we can just defer learning about this for another decade. This is going to be significant today.
Time is now, yeah.
It's, in fact, all the major browsers support, at least partially support HTML5.
Sure, and it becomes a bit hard when people dig into HTML5. One of the things they should recognize is it's not a thing, it's a concept. HTML5 is really an umbrella term for a lot of things, evolving more or less in parallel at near the same pace to build this richer web. So you're not going to ever have a finished HTML5. In fact, there's a push now to even drop the version number. Let's just call HTML5 a living standard.
The logos drop the version number, I saw.
Right. So the idea there being that what really matters is as we define these new things we need in the standards and as browsers can implement them consistently, this is the state of HTML, the living state of HTML. And so what developers really need to look at when they adopt it is not a version number, not a specific point in time, but a feature check of if I want to use this, is it broadly deployed on the modern browsers I'm targeting, and if it's so, it should be a usable feature.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of those features that are under that umbrella, especially the ones that developers need to be concerned about.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of things that span a great deal of different areas within development. In fact, I've found when I've talked to people about HTML5 for the last year or two, when you lay out a grid of the things that are being talked about in HTML5, topics are not so different than what you might have talked about when you talked about a rich plugin like Silverlight or something like this a few years ago. It's things like geolocation, local storage access, video and audio, rich media, these things, canvas for drawing, these things that basic things we want to have, we want to create a richer experience through standard software. And so a lot of these things are coming together now with broad enough support where they can actually be used without any additional effort in modern browsers, and then for older browsers they can be in many cases, relatively easily adopted through the use of something that we've now come to define as polyfills. And a polyfill is a fancy word for essentially a JavaScript hack or a JavaScript layer that tries to impart to an older browser functionality that it doesn't natively have, so that the HTML5 code you write for a modern browser just works in an older browser as well, running on top of this polyfill, this JavaScript. So it makes the broad set of features we can use, or to invert that, it makes this set of features we can use very broad. There's a lot we can do with HTML5 today.
Okay, so a lot of what you were talking about, those are actually new tags that are defined in HTML.
There are new tags.
The audio and video tags, the canvas tag, and...
So HTML5, if we were to address what's new in it, it's not only new tags, it's also new APIs. So to your point, there are new tags, there are new semantic tags, things that help us describe our content more effectively, like header and footer and nav. And these are primarily for consumption by accessible readers or search engines over time, and just to give us some better layout. And there are new functional tags like the canvas tag and the video tag, audio tag, and these things give us not only a shell on the page, but also new APIs related to those tags. So the canvas tag, for instance, is really more or less just a box, but it's the APIs in JavaScript being defined with that allow you to draw to that box. And so the API is very important. And then you have other things like geolocation, which have no tags at all. Geolocation is just simply a new API, a new JavaScript API, which interfaces directly with the browser. Very important part of what we're dealing with, but has no visual component to it. So there's things through tags and things through APIs as well. And that's one of the things that makes HTML5 new and unique, is that it's a holistic look at the technologies of the web. It's not HTML5 is not just defining the DOM. HTML5 is defining the DOM plus the APIs needed to work with the DOM, which should help us see more consistent browser implementations in the future.
Okay, you mentioned the word semantic. What do you mean by that?
Semantic is just a word that means, or when we say it in the context of HTML, semantic HTML, we're essentially saying HTML that describes its content. So we want semantic rendering. What we're saying is that we want HTML tags that are simply there to describe the content they contain. A header has usually information at the top of the page. An H1 tag has a larger header section title. Unordered list of items should have UL and LI. And it's different from where we did a lot of HTML in the late 90s and the early 2000s, where we use HTML as a layout vehicle. And we're all familiar with the table-based layout and the nested tables to create menus, and that's what we would generally consider non-semantic markup, where the markup is a function of layout rather than a function of describing the content it contains. So modern websites going forward increasingly are relying on semantic markup, not only because it's better for performance, but it's better for accessibility, better for indexing, and all around a better approach to HTML and web development.
Okay, and then we rely on style sheets then to actually do the layout.
Right. Style sheets give us that third wing of, it's not technically HTML5, but it's very much part of the conversation, CSS3 and the evolution of style sheets. And with the new selectors coming through that and other new features there, they give us that powerful functional aspect we need to take this semantic HTML and lay it out however we need it to be laid out.
Okay.
Which is really helpful when we start talking about mobile as well, because mobile is a new frontier increasingly being influenced by HTML5 because there are much fewer, let me rephrase it, there are a lot less roadblocks to adopting HTML5 on mobile than even on desktop. Because we don't have this broad deployment of legacy smartphone browsers. We primarily hit browsers that have been introduced in the last year or two, maybe 3, that are HTML5 enabled to varying degrees and to varying features, but nonetheless HTML5, which means we now have an even more important reason to do things in semantic ways so that our style sheets can make it look right on the desktop, right on the mobile device, because we have varying screen sizes and resolutions that we need to be able to account for when our page is rendered in different places.
Okay, so don't the idea there would be don't hard code your layout inside of your HTML.
Right. The idea of
skin it. Based
make
on
your
what kind of
HTML semantic, make it describe its content. Don't consider layout in that process, and then let your CSS do that layout. And if you do that, you'll end up with something that can be very easily, as you say, skinned or themed for different environments, quite dramatically. In fact, if people have not seen it, I would definitely refer people to the CSS Zen Garden project. It's a great example of how dramatically you can change the appearance, the layout of a page without touching the HTML at all. It's a great proof of concept of how powerful CSS can be.
Okay, we'll put a link to that. The features you're talking about here, the APIs, the new tags, all this is, not every browser is implementing everything simultaneously.
Right.
So we, as developers, we've got issues there. What I want to target my application to run properly under every browser. You talked a little bit about that with legacy browsers, older browsers, and making these things, using JavaScript to compensate for that. But do I need to take that similar approach when I'm targeting both Internet Explorer and Firefox and Chrome?
So one of the things I've started to define in my talks about HTML5 is when you look at HTML5 and adoption, there really are several different adoption strategies. And I won't review the complete spectrum of strategies, but there are 2 strategies in particular that help developers adopting HTML5 that want to target a broad range of browsers, but there are different features they want to hit. One, of course, is the polyfill, which is basically adding functionality to older browsers so that there is a seemingly transparent on-par experience from old browser to new browser. And then there's another approach which is really more of a design approach than a development approach, but it's a very important one to adopt new technologies of the web, and that is simply to create alternative experiences with either progressive enhancement or with graceful degradation. And those two things have always been fundamental to how the web has evolved. And if you can adopt that approach in thinking to designing your site, you can provide a richer experience to the newer browsers while still providing a functional experience to the older browsers. And of course, with any HTML5 adoption, you want to check at the per feature level. You don't check is HTML5 available, you check is the video feature available with the codecs I want. Is Canvas available? And there's a great open source library for that called Modernizer. And Modernizer is simply a JavaScript library which gives you a very simple approach for checking both CSS3 and JavaScript API and HTML5 features, the whole umbrella, and gives you a very consistent, simple way to check for that. So in your sites, you can make decisions either through styling or through JavaScript code how to behave if certain features are or aren't available in the browsers you're targeting.
Okay.
Combined, it gives you the tools you need to either provide a consistent experience with some effort across all browsers or alternate experiences depending on the capabilities of the browsers visiting your site.
Understood. Anything else?
I think you brought it up, and I think if I had to close, I'd say HTML5 is something that people shouldn't wait to dig into it. The time is now. We know Microsoft is making continually large investments into HTML5, and we'll see more about that as the year rolls along here. We know that other companies are investing heavily in HTML5. Chrome has made a big bet, or Google rather has made a big bet through Chrome OS, and we hear rumors about Facebook's investment. And we look at mobile, we look at desktops. Regardless of whether or not how you feel about HTML5 or JavaScript, it's going to be a big part of the future. And so I'd encourage developers who have the need to reach large audiences. So if you have the ability to reach across platforms, across devices, HTML5 and JavaScript are increasingly looking like the way that will be done, where native experiences, rich experiences on Windows with XAML, on iOS with Objective-C, they'll always be there, but HTML5 is going to increasingly become that reach technology. And everybody is increasingly recognizing that, so the momentum is there. There's great resources out there to start learning it, and I think if people want to jump in, now's a great time to do it.
ToddAnglin, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Always fun. Technology and Telerik are your friend, and if you're working with technology, you need Telerik tools, so that makes me friendly. I will be your friend.